Welcome, everybody. You're joining our live event after some serious technical difficulties, but here we are. Instead of our weekly scheduled podcast, Empire State of Cannabis, we decided to go live today with myself and CFO, COO Amman Weaver, talk about everything that's going on and just provide some relevant context and have a discussion. So here we are. Like I said, we're having some technical difficulties, so we hope that you can hear us. So welcome Amman to not necessarily Empire State of Cannabis, but a break in your regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think, obviously, I'm very fortunate that we can kind of sit down and have this conversation. And, let me begin by saying this. In this age of information, we are constantly bombarded with all these sound bites and segments of news that are placed out of context, and with social justice issues and this movement specifically, context is very important. And one of the things that the news is focusing on all these riots and the violent protests, but because of that, we don't that's not a reason to delegitimize this movement, right? We have to The onus is on us as the consumers of information to go beyond the surface level and really dig deeper and recognize that it is the minority group of individuals that are committing these acts of violence, right? And moreover, what we need to take into consideration is it's okay to hate the violence and not like these things that you are seeing perpetrated in your city or elsewhere, right?
So it's kind of quiet. Eric said it's kind
Oh,
of
it's kind
quiet.
of quiet.
Yeah,
Okay.
so speak up. You might have to go right into the mic on the camera. Just
Is this better? Is this better?
I don't think that mic's working.
It's not working.
No, I think we set it to the default mic, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
lot
I'll speak
anyways.
up. What I'm getting at is we need to take time to consider the perspective of the oppressed group, right? Yes, I hate the violence. No one really likes violence, but when you are put in that situation, right, where you have been silenced continuously for years to come, and whenever you are protesting in a peaceful manner, people are telling you you're doing it the wrong way. At some point, people begin to act out. Martin Luther King said it the best when he said, a riot is the language of the unheard. And this is something that I urge people to acknowledge, right? When you see these acts of violence, when you see this destruction, don't be so quick to condemn these people. Rather, acknowledge it for what it is, which is a cry for help, right? These people are in despair, and we need to take that into consideration.
So how do people stand in solidarity? What's the way to do that? If you're someone and you're upset by what has happened, and you're upset by what is happening now, how do you express it in a positive way that you're contributing?
So let's take, our community, for instance, right? Rec Park, Kaylin and I grew up in the area.
In Binghamton.
In Binghamton, right? Last night, there was a fire to one of the children's playgrounds, and a lot of people are upset by that, as am I. But again, do not view that act in a silo to where you're going to all of a sudden delegitimize this movement, right? Be upset. No, I'm not here to try to tell you how to feel. No one can do that. What I'm offering is a different viewpoint to look at the movement in its entirety. So you can stand in solidarity despite the fact that there are a few who are going to commit these acts that we really aren't happy about.
So, but how do you stand in solidarity to make lasting change, right? Because what's going on now is relevant. Is it going to be relevant in 2-3 weeks? Is it off the news cycle in 2-3 weeks? Is it off social medias? So what action items can you do, and the people listening do, that changes the way the trajectory that we're on, right? Because this isn't just a isolated incident, right? This is a buildup of frustration that has been happening for decades, been happening for decades. And it, in a lot of ways, as you say, the oppressed group, it's an oppression of a group's cry for help, right? So they've been saying this and they've been protesting in multiple ways, right? We see the peaceful protests from Colin Kaepernick, through professional sports, professional artists, right? And so you see it in the pop culture, and in a lot of ways, Black Lives Matter has become a meme. How do we take it out of a meme? How do we take it into a way that we see actionable change in society? And how can everyone, black, white, Republican, Democrat, everyone engage?
So most importantly, this movement is not meant to alienate anybody, right? This movement is meant to unify. I cannot emphasize that enough, because that is the missing piece of the puzzle. The way we can affect lasting change is by not being short-sighted and looking at the long term when we decide how we're going to protest, right? I'm a big proponent of the idea that we can be disruptive without being destructive, right? And when you are protesting in a disruptive rather than a destructive way, you can maintain the momentum for long periods of time, right? This is not a situation where you should be outraged, today, tomorrow, for the next few weeks, and then let it die off. No, you need to keep this going. But the only way we do that is if we are productive in the way that we are trying to unite everybody. And I think one of the things that is completely overlooked and as a solution is more community involvement. That is one piece of the puzzle that we can control.
And so we think community involvement and engagement, what does that look like?
And that's a great question, right? I think it should vary from locality to locality, but what it looks like is you need to stay apprised of the political landscape in your locality. That means you've got to vote. I'm not too fond of politics myself, but when these people who are in a position of power are the ones, dictating how easy it is for, perhaps the chief of police to fire people that have committed, heinous acts, you need to have a say in that matter, right? And then moreover is you need to have these community review boards. You need to be willing to sit on a board that is going to add a level of accountability to everyone, right? Whether that be law enforcement, political officials, you need to continually stay engaged and not allow these institutions to operate in the background unchecked.
Well, listen, I think that's an important point, right? Because at the end of the day, law enforcement, they are members of society, right? And a lot of the issue is that they then are bestowed this awesome responsibility of life or death and freedom. A law enforcement official can take away your freedom at any point, right? He can detain you. The criminal justice system has to detain you indefinitely. They can take away your freedom indefinitely, right? That's a due process. But in lieu of due process, we do allow officers to detain, and this is what we're talking about with the recent incident where a detention that wasn't necessarily warranted, that detention, that his not being able to move and defend himself as you would look at a regular interaction between two people where you're defending yourself. You're not going to let someone kill you. You're not going to say, okay, yeah, why don't you just come, put your name. But if they handcuff you, if they have a badge, if they have a gun, there you have no other choice.
Yep.
So how much of this is also a basic respect that people have to put in their everyday life when they're dealing with people, not just different color, but different creed, different culture, different politics now, right? So is this culture of not respecting the other and division, I wonder if that's playing into this. And then you get someone who has hatred in their heart and a badge and a gun, handcuffs, and all of a sudden you have a murder.
Mm-hmm. No, you're exactly right about this. There is a communication break when it comes to how willing we are to try to see something from a different perspective, right? When you are when you are black, the way you interact with a cop is going to be very different than someone who might interact with a cop who's white. Personally, I immediately am apprehensive and fearful because I don't know what's going to happen next. As a result, I may be a little bit more agitated or on edge. And one of the things we need to continue to, emphasize and work towards fixing is not reading too far into body language and quickly coming to these conclusions. Let's take into consideration the person's culture, that person's situation, rather than trying to fit everybody in a box. Because just because someone's acting in a certain way is not necessarily reflective of their mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to remind everyone live, we're watching your comments. So if you have a question, you want us to bring up a topic, go for it. And I think right now, so we're looking at, okay, what position are we in? What position are we in to affect change? And we look at the industry. We're in the cannabis industry. It's a nation industry. And we have an opportunity to do things different, to change more of these, beyond the issues of today, the issues of yesterday, where we have created a system where, it's easier to climb up the corporate ladder in the United States, no matter the industry, if you're white and if you're a white man, right? And so how do we consciously and, as someone who's in charge of hiring, right, and as someone who is in charge of the finances of a company like us we're leading the industry, but how do the entrepreneurs that we work with, how do they engage that and say, I'm going to flip the script here and we're going to try to do things differently? That can be a daunting task, though. So what does that really mean?
It's incredibly daunting. And what it means is when we take into consideration the decriminalization of cannabis, there's a lot that comes along with that. All of a sudden, the black community, the Latina community, what have it, they are now no longer continually need to be viewed as criminals, right? Because a lot of these arrests and this condemning was unwarranted, but as we've said now, okay, cannabis is legal, let's clean the slate. Let's take a step forward and say, yes, now that we have finally come to a point where we no longer are, abusively just punishing these acts, let's move forward and do better. So it begins by, taking these communities that were adversely affected by the prohibition of cannabis and putting them in a position to where they can now succeed in this new industry. Not only succeed at, the lower levels, but at management and executive levels, because that's the only way we are going to give them a real opportunity to climb up the socioeconomic ladder.
So what does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean, though, go out and say, okay, I'm going to, I have a position open, I'm only going to find a black female to fill it. But does it mean, though, changing your bias in hiring, looking past the resume, giving opportunities, maybe looking at someone who has a criminal record, right? So what are these little things that I guess people don't maybe necessarily think of when they're going through the hiring process? And I don't think a lot of people are like, I'm going to be racist in this hiring process. But selection bias is filtering out good candidates who may be of color, or may be poor, or maybe from a different situation, right? So from your experience, looking at a lot of different resumes and going through the onboarding process and the hiring process, how do you consciously change that if you're in that position in order to elevate disadvantaged communities into positions of power, like you said, and this concept of pride of ownership, right? So we can talk about that, but from a hiring perspective, how do you break down some of those biases that you might not even know exist?
Yeah, well, for starters, in recruitment, you need to be willing to change the way you recruit, right? You don't need a tactic. You don't need to say we're going to focus purely on trying to hire X amount of, minority people. No, if you change the way you're searching for talent, they're there. It's not as if, you have to try hard to find them. No, you might just have to try a different method. And that also comes with the way you review resumes. Disadvantaged individuals may not have been afforded the same opportunity as their advantaged counterparts, in which case the criteria you look at needs to be reevaluated. And it's all these little decisions leading up to the actual hiring process that need to be put under a microscope, and you need to be open and honest with yourself and say, am I actually implementing a recruitment initiative that provides equal opportunity to everyone, and it's actually reaching everyone and not such a specific demographic.
Absolutely, and I think we got a question from Eric Cohn. He says, how has Will cannabis farming helped disadvantaged communities? What can we do to make sure the ideal situation exists? And I think this is an interesting thing, right? Because you think about cannabis farming, but let's look at the industry. So let's take a step back, look at some more bird's eye view of the industry, because there's a lot of opportunities in the industry beyond farming, right? And so it's a question of how we engage these communities. So there's multiple paths. I think it's a hybrid. There's a policy path where we say, essentially we've got your social equity applicants, right? You apply, you get fast tracked. And from my perspective, it's more about the barriers and breaking down the barriers to entry, right? I think you hear a lot from these individuals in these communities, entrepreneurs, and say, yeah, you don't need to give me preference. That's not the worst thing in the world, right? We can talk about preference and affirmative action in the process, but make it so it's just as easy for me to enter as the hedge fund guy who's probably bringing a white male team, a privileged white male team that at the end of the day don't know what they're doing. So how do we break down these barriers? And I think it's interesting, as a CFO, how much does finance and the barriers to financing work into it?
So access to institutional capital makes all the difference when trying to, create and launch a successful company, right? You may have a great idea and a great execution strategy, but if you don't have access to the capital necessary, you're likely gonna fail. And that is one of the major hurdles we need to find a way to get over. So providing, these access to institutionalized capital should be priority number one. And the second thing is, let's train people. Let's teach people how to run companies, right? Maybe someone has all the knowledge and all the expertise, but they have never been put in a position to where they have to run an organized company, right? All of a sudden, they don't know what goes into that. They don't know about the nuances when it comes to taxes, right? They don't know about the nuances when it comes to, hiring people, what posters you need to have up. There are all these details that aren't necessarily, right in front of you that people aren't aware of. So let's go and help people out.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that crossed my mind is they might be thinking we're violating social distancing right now. It's okay. We live together.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same household. Let's continue to prevent this spread here. But so, that's a barrier. And we talk about job training. I think that's huge, right? Because we're looking at a massive pot of, no pun intended, of revenue from tax revenues, right? So where can that money be allocated? We're talking about, I want to allocate it here and here and here, but maybe job training is a great place to do that. And maybe organizations such as the Urban League, which is already doing job training, even in our community here, maybe that funding should go there. The problem now is that dollar was from cannabis. So until we get the federal government on board, some of these organizations might not be willing to take that money.
Which absolutely needs to change quickly. But yeah, no, you make a very great point. By partnering up with organizations like the Urban League, let's funnel tax revenue there. We'll have job training, management training, executive training, entrepreneurial training, the whole gamut to allow these people to really step into the industry and achieve greater success, because now they are equipped with the tools and the skill set they're going to allow them to excel.
And what can they now bring back to their community? And now let's go full circle back to what we see going on. How much does that impact a community that now has Black-owned businesses, black executives, suites with black and brown and women and a diverse selection. So now you have a thriving, diverse community that has money in their pockets, that has pride in ownership.
Oh, yes.
And then now is going, and maybe they're running for school board. Maybe they're running for town council, maybe city council. And all of a sudden the perspective is starting to change because now kids are going to the same school, right? Yep. So all these things, it matters beyond just the context of cannabis, but it matters in the context of community, right?
It absolutely does. When you begin to empower the members of your community, you will see change, or you'll see a ripple effect. And one of the things that we noticed in the fall was we hired 61 people from in the surrounding community. And what really resonated with me was when people pulled me aside and they said, it's refreshing to see someone that looks like me, running the company, right? And they said that to them, they were all the more willing to come to work and give that effort to help the company succeed, right? And it goes back to this idea of empowerment. You see someone like you running a company, all of a sudden you think, I can do that. You know what? I can do that. Why not me? And then you begin to aspire to greater things and really reach for that next level. And we'll see, the subsequent generations, do well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts with legalization, right? And then undoing some of the harm that we've seen the drug war impose, right? I mean, I say it all the time, when you look at the value chain of illicit cannabis, right? And you look at, okay, you got a grower, you got a distributor, you got a retailer. That doesn't matter whether it's legal or illegal. The same process happens.
Yep.
So let's think, who's the grower? Well, it's mostly, poor, white, rural members of our society, right? And while they're taking a significant amount of risk by growing an illegal crop and worrying about law enforcement, you seldom see in the numbers much incarceration on that level of the supply chain, right? Where you start to see incarceration numbers really start to come into play and really unfair. And when we talk about incarceration, it's the loss of freedom. Yep. You are losing your freedom, which is the ultimate gift that you have by living in this country, is freedom. So you lose your freedom. And what happens, because you're on the street, you're selling a dime of the pot that was grown in that rural community, but you are pulling all the exposure on you. But without you selling that dime, that person in that community does not get paid for their crop. It's a crop, right? Yeah, it's illegal, but it's still a crop. So let's peel that back and say, okay, yes, it's not just black and brown people in the cannabis industry, but is it the fact that black and brown people are most likely to lose their beloved freedom by participating in the illicit market, right? And the longer we wait for legalization, the longer we wait for a quote-unquote perfect bill, the more time we have for these people to experience, again, loss of freedom. And that has a ripple effect through the family units, through generations, and in the communities. So, righting that wrong is important, but what does that look like, do you think?
Well, for starters, it looks like giving these people their liberties back, right? Giving them their freedom and trying to come up with a legitimate solution to make up for that loss of time. Even though it was illegal at the time, it was excessive. The punishment was incredibly excessive.
Well, it's still illegal. Unfortunately.
Yes, it is still
illegal. People are still getting locked up.
They are still getting locked up.
Let's not forget that right now in New York State, you can get locked up for selling pot.
You can.
Unless you're MedMen. And you have a store on Fifth Ave. You're not getting locked up then, right?
No, you're right. Yes, you're not going to get locked up as long as you have money to back yourself. That's pretty much what it boils down to, But
too bad we don't have a studio. We could pull up a picture of the executive suite at MedMen.
Oh, dude, that'd be great.
I bet it doesn't look like this.
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
So
not even remotely.
So that's a problem, and that is another. Let's not give the opportunity to them. No. Let's give the opportunity to our communities here. And if we give the opportunity to our communities, maybe the industry will look more like those communities.
Yes, it will look more like those communities, and it'll probably last longer.
No.
It'll probably thrive at a greater extent than it would if we allow, all these, multi-state operators and these big cannabis players come in and taint it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you're just joining us, we took a break from our regularly scheduled programming of releasing, we're up to episode 8 here on Empire State of Cannabis. We'll get to you next week. It's actually a great episode. But things are going on. Things are not okay in society, and these conversations need to exist. And there needs to be a space for everyone to have these kind of conversations and these discussions, and everyone needs to engage, black, white, conservative, Republican. If you live in the sticks or you live in the city, right, you need to engage in these conversations. You need to engage your neighbors. We need to reach out and be a little more compassionate and a little nicer to people, a little more respectful. And so that's why we decided to come on and kind of have this discussion. And we have talked about cannabis, and we've talked about what you can do to kind of join in what's going on, and obviously not join in some of the violence, and we touched on that a little bit too. But it's an important time right now. Sitting on the sideline is not it. And so if you have any questions, have any comments, let us know. But Amman, so for people that join us, maybe they weren't at the beginning. Again, what should they be doing? It's a confusing time for everyone right now. If you're in a position of privilege, what should you do with it?
You should be vocal. Yeah. You should be vocal, right? As we've seen, nationwide, people are beginning to speak out, right? Because as like when you have a position of privilege, your words don't fall on deaf ears as much, right? For me, as well spoken as I can be at times, I still have to scream to be heard, and that is a massive problem in itself, right? There have been times when I have, it's people will form an opinion on me immediately, right? And then it'll take 5, maybe 10 minutes into the conversation before I see them ease up, and then all of a sudden there's that openness, right? And if we can all really work towards being more compassionate to one another and being less, rushed to come to these conclusions about another, we can begin to really unite and come together. And that's what's missing, right? Because what it boils down to is we have a systemic issue that is leading to all these, these police brutality, right? To, these riots. If we do not solve the issue at its root, in a few months, everybody's going to forget about it, right? And that's my biggest fear. My biggest fear is that 3 months down the line, we have, stopped trying, right? Or we have moved on. Let's not move on. And let's not be placated as well, because even if those 4 officers are brought to justice, it doesn't stop there. We may have won the battle, but the war has not finished. So we have to continue to march forward. We have to stay vocal, and we have to find ways, as we mentioned previously, to stay involved within our community.
Yeah.
It starts there, and then on the other side is, I believe the onus is on law enforcement to try and repair some of these relations that have been, destroyed over the past week or so. I know it may not be, their fault necessarily, but it is their responsibility to go out and provide hope to these communities, right? Because right now, I don't think there is any.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if sometimes it's hard to fight a war when you can't clearly see the enemy. So it's important to know that the enemy is inside yourself, and it's inside of everyone. It's a move towards divisiveness. Mm-hmm. It's your quick gut instinct to be stereotyping. Mm-hmm. It's your gut instinct to, quickly draw a conclusion about someone. And you're not wrong for that. What you're wrong for is what you do after you have that gut instinct, after you've made that stereotype, because it's fine. Everyone stereotypes. Everyone does. But what happens is what do you do with that stereotype? Do you recognize that and go, there's the enemy. Let me break that down. Where is that coming from? How can I change that? Do I need to go switch up some of my routines? Maybe I need to start going to a gym in another neighborhood. Simple things like that. Maybe I need to switch up my engagement in the community. Maybe I need to look to another community to get engaged to say, what the hell is really all going on? And what is this all about? And what is this person really about? And what are these people, black people or the people on the south side or this? No. Why don't you get familiar with who they are and who their families are? And maybe there's a lot more in common there than you actually thought before, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the things we continually overlook as humans. The fact that, yes, we may exist in a spectrum of skin tones, but at the end of the day, we are all human, and we are more alike than not.
Yeah.
As much as some people may not want to admit that, you might be shocked to find out who enjoys the same music as you do.
Yeah.
You might be shocked to find out who enjoys going to the same hiking spots as you do, right? It's never one group of people that like something. It is everyone in all different shapes, sizes, colors, you name it. There's commonality there, and we need to make more of an effort to look towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we wrap up here, Amman, is there anything that you want to leave the audience with, or challenge them to do?
Yeah, I challenge everyone in the audience to maintain the momentum. I think do what you think you can to keep the conversation alive, right? If that means, sharing, posts about, different viewpoints and different perspectives, go for it, right? If that means sitting down and having conversations with someone of a differing viewpoint, absolutely go for it. And if for you that means finding a way to become, more active, or finding a way to, maybe work hand in hand with, law enforcement to try and fix some of these issues, then please go for it. Personally, I'm going to do whatever I can, from here on to be more involved. And I want to take a very active role. So I'm writing letters to, our local, politicians, our local law enforcement, right? I sat down and had dinner, with a sheriff last night, and I'm going to continue to have these conversations because I'm not letting this die out, right? My goal is not to have, justice for a few, but I'm seeking justice for all.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll leave you with that, and I think it's important to continue to realize that person might not be okay. Your friend, your family member, maybe a Facebook friend, maybe a classmate, they might not be okay right now. And we need a little more compassion, we need a little more respect, we need a little more humanism here. So connect maybe a little bit beyond commenting on their status. And we can't all be together physically right now because this deadly virus is still out there. But we do have Zoom. We do have ways now to have these conversations. And I just think everyone should. And recognize, too, that it is okay that you may have privilege, white privilege, white male privilege, if both boxes are checked. But it's okay. It's okay, and you can feel comfortable with that, but it's not okay to not use that platform to amplify the others who may not have that privilege. And that's not okay right
it's
now.
Okay to feel uncomfortable when having these conversations. They're uncomfortable for a reason, but that shouldn't deter you, right? Kayla and I have conversations like this all the time because there's that openness there. So if you decide to embark, down this route and to elicit these conversations, I just implore that you stay open and compassionate.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amman.
Absolutely.
And like I said, we'll be back next week with our regular podcast, but we will continue to amplify these kind of conversations and discussions, and I hope you do too.